The Walla Walla Valley is a complex system of biology and geologic processes. For most, the valley is characterized by its quaint cities, lush agricultural fields, and excellent fishing and hunting. But to better understand the valley, we must first break it into its geologic constituents. Between 14 and 16 million years ago, enormous basaltic lava flows begin to erupt, filling large portions of the Northwest with over 200 cubic kilometers of rock. Nobody really knows what it looked like, so I like to imagine it like this. The Columbia River basalt makes up the foundation and underlying structure for all the features we see throughout the valley. During the last glaciation, 12 to 15,000 years ago, glacial Lake Missoula periodically drained its 2,000 cubic kilometers of water in the form of catastrophic floods across northern Idaho and eastern Washington. With the water came enormous amounts of both sedimentation and erosion throughout the valley. Again, we don't really know what it looked like when the floods came through, so I like to imagine it like this. Contrary to my vision, however, the Missoula floods only deposited sediment in the low spots on the landscape. Now the last thing we have to consider is the loess, or wind-blown silt. The silt was created by glaciers to the north of us during the last glaciation by pulverizing and grinding rocks until they became tiny particles. Then consistent winds over the next 12,000 years lifted the silt into suspension and carried it south to Walla Walla, where it draped it over the landscape. Subsidence, deformation, erosion, and sedimentation were all happening throughout these other events. Some features have been erased through time, while others have been encased in basalt or covered in loess. The Blue Mountain anticline is the main structurally bounding feature in the valley. It is responsible for the overall shape and location of the valley. It is also responsible for providing the area with the moisture it needs to support healthy populations of plants, animals, and people. Some might think the Blue Mountains formed like this. But in reality, the uplift of the Blue Mountains likely happened concurrently with other tectonically derived features in the area. Before becoming a burgeoning agricultural center of the United States, the Walla Walla Valley was known only to local tribes and animal inhabitants. Long before the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla people all lived in the valley happily with bountiful food and water resources. Upon Lewis and Clark's arrival and extended stay from 1805 to 1806, change was imminent and bound to be explosive. By 1818, Fort Nez Perce was made, the first non-Indian structure of the area. Less than 20 years later, the area's most prevalent Protestant missionary, Marcus Whitman, arrived on tribal land.
There were 4 Plateau Indians who went to see Captain Clark in St. Louis. The Lewis and Clark expedition had been up in the area. The people up here had met Captains Lewis and Clark, and the exact reason of what they were thinking is they wanted something. So people theorized, possibly spiritual power as a very leading contender. That's something that the tribe is very important to them today, very important to them historically. is spiritual power. What got printed in the newspapers back east was, they got translated to the book, and it comes with the book, which being the Bible, which meant Christianity. And so a group of Presbyterians, Congregationalists, and Dutch Reformists who sent missionaries all over the world, and when they read this report or heard of this in the newspapers and such, they decided that they were going to send missionaries into this part of the world, which was not completely U.S. territory yet. It was kind of a joint occupancy area.
What Whitman's intention was, to, I guess, civilize the Indian people. But, they survived off of the land long before the Whitmans came.
It was a time of a strong religious revival, and they were very, very taken up in this, and they were very strongly religious and felt the desire to spread the word and help others. Which brings us to 1847. We're having more and more of these wagons are coming through. The numbers have gotten much larger. Some of these people are sick. They're coming to see the doctor. And some of them have measles. So we know that measles were on one of the wagon trains that stopped here. In addition, there had been a group of Indian men who had gone down to Spanish California who were also exposed to measles. So that was also a possibility. But for whatever reason, measles hit this area, and half of the local Cayuse population died within a matter of months. And that was the trigger for the attacks that occurred here.
Marcus Whitman and his wife Narcissa had their lives cut short just before the United States went to war with the local tribes in 1848. Shortly thereafter, Isaac Stevens, on behalf of the United States government, introduced the Treaty of 1855.
And when the Treaty of 1855 was made with the people in the area, our leaders held back on signing because Stevens was only going to do 2 reservations, the Yakima and the Nez Perce. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't even have what they call the Confederated Umatilla tribes.
This initially intended to give the tribes access to their native lands and resources, while settlers were establishing communities throughout the area. Upon Oregon's initiation of statehood in 1859, the U.S. Congress ratified the Treaty of 1855, forcing the Confederated Umatilla tribes to cede over 6 million acres of land.
Depression area hit, and it hit hard on a lot of the people, and so that is one of the reasons why we have a checkerboard reservation, because Indians failed in their being a farmer or rancher, and so then they sold their land to non-Indians.
After a series of refinements and allotments over the next 100 years, tribal land was reduced to 170,000 acres, and access to off-reservation resources was revoked.
We had, people that were elders that were very mindful, I guess. They paid attention. They didn't have to have, formal education. It was just their instinct of looking ahead, and tried to really negotiate, tried to talk for us. And that's the way it's stated. You always think 7 generations ahead.
In 1949, the tribes took to recreating their community on the reservation. They have been successful in reinstating the terms initially agreed upon in the Treaty of 1855, and continue to use their influence in the local government to improve the land for themselves and others.
We still, by the Treaty of 1855, that's our legal document, we still have access to our ceded area, which is 6.4 million acres of land. But, all of that, my grandma would tell us, all of that's going to go away. You work hard and you hurt, but yet, that's going down on your piece of paper.
Now that we know some more about the geology and the history of the area, we can begin discussing why it has been so desirable to live here in Walla Walla. While the valley itself may be considered arid, the area is hardly short on water. Some places in the Blue Mountains receive over 50 inches of rain a year. That rain then comes down in surface water or through the shallow gravel aquifers that quench the thirst of Walla Walla and Milton Freewater. Also, while more difficult to obtain, there is water in the flow-top breccias between the basalt flows. Surface water in the Walla Walla Valley is characterized by a tangle of drainages that all lead toward the Columbia. Diversions and pumps are used for irrigation, but thanks to changing water laws, water now remains in the most important streams year-round. Temporary holding ponds such as Bennington Lake provide water storage, flood mitigation, and recreational opportunities. But not everything is running so smooth.
The upper and lower thirds are a whole bunch of weirs or concrete ledges with riprap and gabions on the sides of the creek. The central portion, which has also been straightened, is through and under town, and it is a concrete box. There are two somewhat competing factors, and that is that the Mill Creek project was a flood control project built in response to a severe flood in Walla Walla in the 1930s. And so we want Mill Creek to be as good as it can be to reduce flooding. But as I said before, Mill Creek is also the route that fish like to go up to spawn. And what's good for flood control is not necessarily good for fish migration.
Bennington Lake, Lowhead dams, and cement channels have all proven to be barriers for fish passage and hinder the biological community.
I remember what it was like when I got here in 1975. The banks were all trampled by cattle, and there was poop all over the place.
Things were built, people, it was a long time ago, people didn't really understand the effects that they were going to have, at least not everyone understood. Mm-hmm. And now, that we do, we like to correct those whenever we can. That the decline, because that we saw earlier, it was widespread. It wasn't just Looking Glass Creek, it wasn't just the North Touchee or just the south of the Walla Walla. It was happening in all the streams in the northern Blue Mountains. So that suggests that whatever the cause is, it's a pretty widespread cause. It's not just something local in one area, one activity, one action that somebody did. That the decline is something general, caused by something general and widespread. What that is, it's hard to say. There are many possible things that it could be. It could be conditions downstream. It might be global climate change, or who knows? So there are a lot of things, and it might be just part of a natural cycle that they're going through. That there's a natural cycle of decrease and increase. It'll take a lot more study and data gathering and analysis to figure it out.
The amount of money that's been spent in the Pacific Northwest on salmon and steelhead recovery, people go, okay, where are the fish? Well, we've damaged where we've modified the watersheds over the last 140 years to degrade them. It's going to take a long time to bring them back. It's not an immediate fix.
One example of a project is the restoration of Doan Creek at Whitman Mission. Here is the project manager, Roger Trick, to take us through the process thus far.
The first mention of restoring Doan Creek was in the general management plan from the year 2000. And we talked with park neighbors about what changes they wanted to see, and we suggested some. And one thing we suggested was that we do something with this northern part of the park to restore the stream. And What we found was most of the neighbors really weren't very enthusiastic. They liked the system the way it was. What we had to do was guarantee them, absolutely guarantee them their water rights. Doan Creek has to not only be good for fish, but it also has to furnish irrigation water to irrigators. And we worked with them to make sure both of those things were going to happen. We made the decision here in the park that we had to go after some money in order to make it happen, and that finally came through. And then we finally got it going about 2005. This area in back of me was just a field of grass, tall grass, no trees, no nothing else. We knew there was, once upon a time, a Doan Creek through here somewhere. And we kind of found the low spot in this field of grass, and that's pretty close to where the channel is now. That was the easiest place to go with it. And then by late summer and fall of 2005 is when really a backhoe came in and just scooped out the dirt. Since then, we've planted lots of plants alongside it for shade and habitat, and we've installed black plastic alongside it to combat weeds, and I had quite a bit of success. We've seen new animals like beaver and moose come into the area, and we'll keep planting plants and fighting weeds probably many years.
And there are a lot of people that never thought any passage improvements would happen on the Mill Creek flood channel here. So there are a lot of people that are seeing things they never thought they'd see.
Probably the biggest change that I've seen since I've been in Walla Walla has been related to agriculture. The implementation of reduced tillage has greatly increased the quality of the water, the runoff, especially in the wintertime.
The passage in Mill Creek is going to be a requirement for delisting steelhead in Mill Creek. Regardless of the numbers, there's four criteria for delisting, and having access to Mill Creek is going to be one of them.
Well, times are tough. Everybody's, the budget situation, whether it's on the city, county, state, federal level, it's, it's becoming more difficult to get funding.
These things are fairly expensive. This bridge replacement here cost around $90,000, and so coming up with that kind of money, it takes joint ventures with several groups. First started collecting data, the numbers increased for a few years, the number of reds. If you draw a curve, the numbers increased, and then peaked around 2000, 2001, depending on which stream, because I collected data for all the streams in the northern Blue Mountains. And then they began dropping, and they dropped, and they dropped, and they dropped, until the year before last. Last year they looked like they were up a little bit, and we're in the middle of the spawning ground surveys right now as we speak this year. So I can't say for sure, but the two passes that I made in Looking Glass Creek, which is another stream on the other side of the mountain here, that's the one that I do every year. Those numbers appear to be up, so maybe they are starting to come back. I'm hopeful about that. Whether that's because of that, I'd like to think it has something to do with restoration activities that we've been doing. It'll take a little while to see if that's a long-term improvement or if it's just a one-year phenomenon.
Some would say that Walla Walla County leads the nation in terms of stream restoration. The whole process from identifying the problem to finding a solution is being streamlined and put to use. It is becoming a model for the rest of the country how in some cases the local people can take charge of their resources.
Twinkle, quit a drill a witch, twilly, 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 see, blow, blow, witch your riddle tidge, loo, loo, loo.